Welcome. Hey, it's Ed, and we're here on another episode of EdTalks. I think you're going to find this super, super interesting, like I did. I was talking with my friend Arvind, who's a CIO based out of India, worked for some big hospital systems, and recently changed his role. And so when we were talking about his new company that he serves, Karkinos, I was like super intrigued. And we're really blessed to have the CEO, the founder and CEO of Karkinos with us today on Ed Talks, and that's Venkat. So Venkat, welcome to Ed Talks.
Thanks, Ed. Really a pleasure and honor to participate in this endeavor. I've heard a lot about you from Arvind and also read up a bit about what you've been doing, and really humbled by the opportunity to interact with you.
Yeah, this is gonna be great because I really believe what you're doing and how you're doing it. There's so much that we can learn around the world, and so whatever I can do to help. So tell us. So again, welcome to the show. But tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, and how you came to found and lead Karkinos.
I'm a law and a management graduate by training. In addition, I have a research degree in public health from University of Warwick, focused on how digital technologies can help to alleviate healthcare with focus on chronic diseases, especially in low and middle income countries. As a professional background, I spent close to 20 years in the Tata Group. As you know, Tata Group is India's largest conglomerate, and I was fortunate to work very closely with our former chairman, who was an iconic leader, Mr. Ratan Tata, for 15 of those 20 years in a range of capacities, initially beginning as his chief of staff, and then later on I ran the foundation for which he was the chairman. And Tata Group has a unique structure where the foundation owns the majority stock of the holding company, and the foundation is a public charity which he chairs. And this has been the case for almost 100 years. And it's also the country's largest charity, with almost $60 billion of assets, and per annum they distribute 300 to 400 million, depending upon what dividends they get from the parent company. And my familiarity of healthcare in general and oncology in particular was driven by my stint in the Tata Group, where for not many people might be aware, Tatas had been pioneers in cancer in Asia, having set up Asia's first cancer center in the 1930s, which is now called the Tata Memorial Hospital, which is the country's apex hospital, which has been taken over by the government post-independence and runs it. And over the years had helped a number of organizations to either fund cancer treatment or fund cancer research or donate medical equipment, etc. And during that stint, I was also part of commissioning multiple cancer centers in several parts of the country. And that was my familiarity with healthcare and familiarity with oncology. And the genesis of Karkinos was when we were looking at this problem quite closely or acutely. Being a foundation, we always used to get enormous requests from politicians and or governments to establish a cancer center. And having done close to 15 or 20 of them, we realized that was the least of the problem. And because in India, or this is true across many low and middle income countries, by the time a person reaches a cancer center, it's already too late. 7 out of 10 cases are in what they call as stage 3 or stage 4. And 9 out of the 10 are effectively palliative or end of life treatment. That was one. Second, in the management of cancer itself, while we have often kept this as a extreme super specialty, it is a lot more interdisciplinary and participative than proprietary. And given some of the experience of transitions using tech, which have happened in a host of other industries, as an example, banking, fintech, retail, and telecom, we thought, can we take some of those design principles of interconnectedness and apply to this in a way that it becomes, whereas the entire community comes together and functions as a cancer center, not without any walls or boundaries. And when we started, we were just a piece of paper with 2 or 3 people about 3 years ago. End of July, we'll complete 3 years as an organization, but we were very lucky to have the support of my previous boss, my previous company, and a whole bunch of others, including Mayo Clinic. As you know, Mayo Clinic is a legendary healthcare enterprise in US, they never invest direct in places like India. They were quite intrigued with what we were up to and said, look, we believe things like this can make a substantial difference. They not only invested, they're a strategic partner, and their global chief operating officer sits on our board. So in that sense, our own journey has been on how can we unbundle or decouple the knowledge part of care vis-a-vis a delivery system on the back of a curated hierarchy which can be taken at the edge through tech. So sorry for the long-winded opening.
No, that's fascinating. It's super fascinating. I want to jump into maybe one or two examples as we get into that. Just for the audience to get to know you a little bit on a more personal level, like what is your why? So, obviously you're doing some very transformative things, in terms of cancer. Is there a why that sort of drove you this direction?
Two or three very specific reasons. One, I've lost a couple of my very close members in my family due to cancer. That was one. And second, even in the Tata Trust days, while we were building enough delivery centers with respect to Onco, every single place that we set up, we see the same issue in a sense, people turning up late and always the same problem multiple times. So when I was bugging my previous boss on this, saying, he said, look, if you're so paranoid on it, why don't you be the change that you want to see? And we said, if we don't do it this time, we'll always have a regret of having something in my head and not doing or attempting it. And why not take that plunge? And second, what we also realized was the extent of fascination about digital adoption went through the roof during COVID, where by design, everyone did not want to visit a healthcare. And what people realized was you can address several parts of anything in our life in a remote fashion. As an illustration, even a call like this a few years ago would have been blasphemy. Now we are getting on with it in a very seamless manner. And hopefully when Meta comes out with its own versions, we'll have avatar version of ourselves interacting in a 3D or a 4D scenario. And this has phenomenal relevance to several parts of healthcare, and that too for chronic diseases, where what is perhaps required is an access to an expertise, not necessarily the physical presence of an expert. So when we start, therefore, to task shift many elements of it quite significantly, we are only constrained by our imagination. Last but not the least, in places like India, we cannot emulate what has happened in Europe or US because A, the cost structures, B, the financial wherewithal does not exist. And we have to come out with our own versions of extremely frugal innovations. And by the way, India has done that before in definitely a couple of industries like fintech and telecom. Where you have in India the fastest rollout of 5G networks, and the interoperability of payment systems is quite legendary in India. And 1.3 billion people having a unique identity in a digital first format also is quite unprecedented. And going forward as well, there are only two countries, China and India, which will have the maximum cancer burden by far. And for some of the forms of cancer like head and neck, India is about 40% of the global burden. So rather than like a typical delivery system, which everyone talks about, we thought, why don't we attempt to build a connected knowledge system where much of what we attempt to do is participatory, not proprietary. That was the genesis of attempting this.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. There's you said quite a bit there, and if we can go and just like one example just to make it more real. But before I get there, I love what you said about sort of you've had to by just the common pressures and timing and resources. You've been forced as a country, and you've done this before, and telecom is a great example, to sort of skip a generation of innovation and innovate ahead of the curve. So it's just fascinating what we can learn, around the globe, from your experience. And I think this is why I'm so interested in Karkinos and what you're doing, because I think it's an answer for the world in terms of doing things a little bit, or not a little bit, but a lot more efficient. So the example I think with Arvon that we were talking about, is like truck drivers, right? Who are naturally going to be driving to truck stops. And you can naturally double that as a place where, they could receive care.
See, several things like say we have often assumed diseases like cancer are an extreme super specialty, but there are many signs and symptoms which can be picked up in a normal general medicine setting. As an illustration, many dentists can pick up precancerous oral leukoplegia. Many gynecologists can screen and treat early stage cervical and or breast cancer, except it doesn't come or naturally occur to them. Many pulmonologists often misdiagnose a potential symptom for cancer as a tuberculosis or a chest infection because of the sheer knowledge asymmetry, or it doesn't come in their value care pathway. And if you were to take another analogy instead of fintech on aviation, Mr. Tata used to say he's a pilot. He used to say when he learned flying in the 60s and 70s, he had to literally learn everything from geography to mechanics to systems engineering to and whatnot, and carry huge bunch of books and all.
Yeah.
Today, with the airports and the aircrafts being the way they are, a pilot is as much is probably more dependent on the air traffic controller than trying to navigate all of it on his own. If your aircraft has an instrument landing facility and the airport has an ILS, you can literally do a fly-by-wire and land automatically. And the syntax and language across multitude of people, whether you're in Ukraine or in Russia, it's the same Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot. There is a fair degree of consistency and predictability. Despite disputes, despite war, it still goes on. Whereas when it comes to healthcare, we have often built extremely proprietary systems, not participatory systems. And in India, since we did not have historically the legacies of Epic and Cerner, again, no disrespect to them, they're iconic companies by all means, and we did not have the traditional insurance slash massive reimbursement models of FDA approved. You get your CPT code and your life is done. So for us, it was an absolute, whatever is the US healthcare budget is higher than our economy. Of 4 or 5 trillion is the US healthcare budget. India's economy is under 5 trillion. So for us, therefore, many of these innovations are forced upon us by necessity and not by accident by any means. And again, classic to the 2G example, because we came in late, we could literally leapfrog from a landline to a mobile revolution, and even in mobile from a 2G to a 4G literally overnight, and now have the fastest rollout of 5G as well anywhere in the world. So in that sense, for healthcare too, especially for chronic diseases, we can't do that for infectious diseases because for that you still need a physical infrastructure. For chronic diseases where the extent of information asymmetry across the globe is any case getting obliterated, and if we were to reconceive or reimagine this not as a typical physical edifice alone, but more as a knowledge curated entity, more like a platform architecture, we can take the learnings of many platform companies and not just be bound by healthcare companies alone.
Yeah, I love it. And you recently met with Prime Minister Modi. How did that go?
It was fascinating. I think in this era, we are very blessed to have an iconic leader like him. And our meeting was supposed to be for 15 minutes. It went on for almost an hour. And we had a couple of very senior researchers from the US. We had the director of clinical research from Mass General Hospital, as well as the chief executive of American Cancer Society. He was kind enough to give an audience along with our chair of our advisory board, Vivek. So in that sense, he was very intrigued in what we were up to. And his own feedback to us was work on projects that make a difference to a large number of people. Yeah. And in that sense, his own commitment to enhancing the quality of life of people in any sphere, and his own childlike curiosity, which was quite fascinating.
Yeah, no, that's a great audience to have. Clearly, the Prime Minister, and how intrigued he was with what you're doing, and it is so scalable. So I can appreciate his comments about trying to help as many people as possible. Speaking of scale, I know India is where you started and your current focus, but something like this, a platform like this, would scale globally. Do you have plans beyond India?
Absolutely. In fact, at the behest of Mayo Clinic, we have already incorporated a subsidiary in Delaware to look at potential opportunities in US. And with Mayo itself, we're applying some of these design principles of instead of restricting Mayo to just a Rochester, Minneapolis type of center, how can we take it to rest of the state and beyond? Similarly, we're working with Roswell as well as NGH. What applies in Boston, can it be applied to rest of New England, where the entire community can come together as a cancer center? Mayo calls it as cancer care beyond walls, wherein we are bringing in some of our own learnings, experience, and technology elements of what we have done as far as executing things at scale. Because one thing which India gives you by design is numbers.
Yeah.
As mentioned, one of our own state, we have 29 states. One of our own states is in excess of population beyond entire Europe. We produce per annum one Australia a year. So many people, therefore, unless they actually come and see as to what is happening, they won't get a perspective of it. You are well aware, having been an Indophile for many years, you know what it is. But for many of them, off late, they're getting the realization is increasing, and also our own cost structures. Again, no disrespect to our AI engineers or computer scientists, we are almost one third or one fourth of what they would make in San Francisco or San Diego. So in that sense, with the same degree, if not a higher degree of capability and capacity. So in that sense, we also have at this point of time, the financial arbitrage as well to attract and hire talent.
Yeah, and again, I mean that's why I wanted to have this discussion with you and allow you to share, because we get very frustrated, in Europe and in the Americas with the slow pace of change and transformation. And I think sometimes the reason is we get stuck in the parameters that we know today. We don't necessarily think, beyond what we see today in our structure. And so it's hard for us to get, accelerate on the curve, as it were, and really do some transformative things. But because of the circumstances that we already spoke about, it really has allowed you all to pivot pretty quickly and really levered all these different learnings from other industries and bring them to healthcare. And you're doing it at scale, and it's quite exciting. So we talked a lot about sort of your background and your leadership and how you got to where you are today and the founding of Karkinos. And we talked a lot about what it is and the platform and the scalability and how it works. Is there anything you want to leave with our audience before we end today? Is there something that we may have missed or something that you want to just reinforce?
Our own urge is platforms like this for any interaction is a interesting opportunity to make that shift from a traditional illness to a wellness. Yeah. Whether we like it or not, chronic diseases in general and oncology in particular is going to affect literally every third person in this world. And rather than thinking, we often in healthcare, because of past legacies and our behaviors, we often assume that it's not going to affect us. It's going to affect my neighbor or somebody, but not me. Just to watch out for those signs, symptoms, and trends as we move along. And the best things in life are shareable. The best things in life are also free. So in that sense, if we were to evangelize this entire construct that it is literally everyone's responsibility to manage as a society certain diseases like this, we would have made a significant contribution to the quality of lives of people.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I also have I'm a warrior against cancer for a wide variety of reasons, and so thrilled that tackling this disease state first, and then like we talked about, then there's others that will work in a similar fashion. So I really appreciate you sharing with us, and I really appreciate you and the fact that you have this vision, you have this passion, and as you mentioned with I think it was with your former boss who said, "Hey, you need to go out and do this. Don't have regrets. Don't sit there wishing you had done something and you moved."
In this head, we're all reminded of a famous quote of Steve Jobs. where he says vision without execution is hallucination. So in that sense, our own expertise is not necessarily original innovation per se, because many of the innovations in oncology and or in many systems, to a great extent, if not all, have all come from research universities or people from the United States. What we have been able to do or attempt is applying that at scale in a lot more frugal way. It is not somebody has done this somewhere in some other industry or even in the same industry in some form, but how do you take that and translate it into a degree of what you call making a difference to people is what places like India or most other low and middle income countries can give. And by the way, this is also hugely profitable, but the way to look at profits in such countries is not on the back of a per unit margin you make per product, but the efforts you take on a large volume, no margin over a longer tenure cash flow. Very few companies have done that. Probably Gilead was the one which came out first with the accessible drugs program for HIV/AIDS, and the rest is history. So you can do good by doing and do well as well fiscally, and not necessarily on the sticking to the extremely $500,000 or $200,000 type of pill or drug syndromes alone.
That's a great way to end our talk. I really, again, appreciate you, and thank you for being our guest.
Thanks, Ed. That at some point at your convenience would also like to take you through in some more detail on what we are attempting, and hopefully get your guidance and advice on how we could more closely interact in the weeks and months ahead.
Oh yeah, I'm all in on this in particular. So we'll definitely be talking some more. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you.